I was folding the dark dress I wore to my husband's funeral when my phone buzzed with a message from my son. "Mom, I sold the Subaru," it said. Just like that. No hello, no can we talk. 3 sentences, a photo of a bill of sale, and a promise that he'd transfer the money into a management account he'd set up for me. The dress slid out of my hands and pooled on the bedspread like a shadow that didn't know where to stand anymore. The clock on my nightstand still said 9:17, the same hour I'd stared at for the last 17 mornings while the house learned how to sound empty. I whispered into the room, "Michael, why?" But the room had already taken sides with the silence. I'm Helen Carter, 66, Hendersonville, North Carolina. If you've driven the Blue Ridge Parkway at dawn, you've passed the kind of trees that raised me, stubborn, patient, and just a little proud when they hold their color longer than anyone expects. My husband David used to joke that my spine was made of hickory. He also knew when to put a hand on my shoulder and when to leave a mug of tea beside the sink without saying a word. 17 days ago, he left for the hardware store and never came back. The doctor called it a massive stroke. I call it the moment the house decided plates should make bigger sounds. People say grief makes you forgetful. It doesn't. It makes you notice everything. The tinier the better. You notice how long it takes water to boil, how the porch light clicks, how the refrigerator tries to hum hope into the kitchen. You notice, too, when people start talking about your life like it's a lawn that needs mowing. "Mom," my son said that first week, standing in the doorway with the careful tone adult children practice in the car before they see you, "we should be practical." Practical is a good word. It's a word for turning photo albums into boxes and boxes into signatures. I called my friend Ruth the day after the Subaru disappeared from the driveway. Ruth is 72, hair like steel wool and a mind like a receipt drawer. You name a situation, she has the itemized list. Retired judge. Retired, but in the same way the mountains are retired in the winter. She still keeps her robe on a chair, back where she can see it. "Do you have power of attorney paperwork giving Michael the right to sell your car?" She asked me, no fuss. "No," I said. He said it was time to simplify. "Simplify is for closets," Ruth said. "Not for people. Let's go." We drove to the school where the buyer worked. Hendersonville High, the round brick one you pass when you're trying to remember what being 17 felt like. Her name was Elaine Porter, principal, tidy beige cardigan, and a ring with a missing stone. She looked at us like a woman who has never once cut a lunch line. "He said his mother couldn't drive anymore," she told me, and she said it with the kind of sympathy that still believes everybody tells the truth. He also said it was priced to move. I didn't sign the final title transfer yet. I was going to do it after my dentist appointment today. She looked down at the manila folder. "He seemed rushed. I thought maybe there was a reason." "There was," Ruth said, and put 2 fingers on the folder like she was blessing it. "Grief, and a son who mistook the word help for the word control." "Ms. Porter, would you be open to reversing the deal? She'll cover any costs you've had." Elaine's eyebrows did a polite little dance. She turned to me. "Would you?" "Of course," I said, "and I am so sorry you were caught in the middle." Elaine pursed her lips the way a teacher does when a student admits to borrowing a test answer. Then she nodded. "Let's set it right." I drove the Subaru home that afternoon, hands at 10 and 2, like I did when David taught me how to merge on the highway. You can tell a car by its smells the way you can tell a bakery by its breads. This one smelled like cedar shavings and wintergreen gum. David had kept a pack of those in the glove box, along with a tire pressure gauge, a short roll of blue painter's tape, and a single muddy golf tee he said was lucky because it had watched him slice 3 balls into the same pond and still come back the next week. I never open glove boxes unless I'm looking for napkins. That day I opened it because the road was rough and I thought a folded tissue might stop the rattle. A large envelope slid forward. Brown paper, my name written the way only one person ever wrote it, like a promise being underlined. For Helen, open when you're ready. I drove straight home, parked, turned off the engine, and listened to the ticking that comes when heat decides to forgive a machine. I took the envelope into the kitchen and put it on the table where David used to measure boards and spread the paper out like a field. My hands didn't want to rush. I made tea I didn't drink and took the old letter opener from the drawer where it had lived since our first apartment, the one with the missing cupboard door. The envelope gave like a held breath. Inside was a letter written in his engineer's block print and a small USB drive taped to the corner like a child holding a parent's hand while they crossed the street. Len, the letter began. He called me that when the world was trying to be too clever. If you're reading this, I didn't get to say things the long way. You know I prefer the long way. I smiled even as my throat tightened. He told me about an idea he hadn't told me about because he wanted to build it before he bothered me with the scaffolding. A company, Blue Ridge Haven, LLC, that he'd started 20 years ago, the year our son broke his arm falling off the mailbox, and we both realized children are made out of courage and apology. He wrote about buying a small duplex for less than our friends paid for their minivan, about fixing it up on weekends, about renting it to a young couple who invited us to dinner to celebrate their first child's first tooth. Every building is a story, he wrote, and I wanted you to own the ones I could carry. There were more buildings, 4 houses, 2 small apartment structures in Asheville on streets that had learned to enjoy the smell of coffee. A row of storefronts on a block that fought its way back from empty windows to bookstores and a barbershop with a striped pole that spins like hope. All of it managed by a company called Homestead Property Services. I had them send mail to the P.O. box so I could keep it organized, he wrote. The deed work is all in a folder marked Seeds in the blue file cabinet in the garage. The USB has copies. Everything is yours, Lynn. Not because you need it, but because I need to know you'll never be managed by anyone who confuses love with logistics. I stood there with the letter open, the clock pretending nothing had changed. A number he wrote down meant something like breathing room, the monthly income after the managers took their share. Enough to keep me in good tires and good soup, and the kind of roof you don't apologize for in a storm. He named one of the buildings specifically, Maple Crest Apartments, 10 units near the bakery where Michael likes the banana bread. You'll laugh, he wrote, but he's renting there. He never asked for a discount, and I never offered one. It didn't seem kind to mix lessons with help. If you ever feel pushed out, don't push back with noise. Let the rules hold you up. The rules are surprisingly compassionate when everyone has to bear them. I called the manager number David had underlined. A woman named Susan answered. Her voice had the crispness of someone who has labeled a lot of folders. We've worked with your husband for years, she said. He was meticulous. He made it clear the properties were titled to Blue Ridge Haven and that all major decisions would be yours if he passed. She asked if I wanted to keep the current settings, market rate renewals, inspections according to statute, no family exceptions. I swallowed. Yes, I said, no exceptions. It's the fairest way, she said, and I couldn't tell if she meant fair to me or fair to everyone or just fair as a concept. Maybe it doesn't matter when the right thing and the kind thing shake hands. The next day I texted Michael to come by. He arrived with the energy of a man who believes he's the only adult in a room he hasn't looked around. He brought paperwork from a bank and a brochure for a senior living community with a pool shaped like a comma. He started sentences with "we need" and "it's time," little tramlines that expect you to ride. I set a plate of oatmeal cookies on the table. He doesn't eat sugar after lunch, but he took one out of habit and set it down like a bookmark. "Mom," he said, "I know this is difficult. After everything with Dad, it's understandable that you're clinging to routines, but selling the car was the right call, and I've got a plan to make sure you're covered." "Covered," I repeated, and let the words sit there like a coat thrown over a chair that was already warm. "Michael, do you have power of attorney?" He frowned. "We don't need to make this legal. I'm your son." "That isn't an answer," I said, and I watched his jaw change its mind about patience. "No," he said, "I don't." "But Mom, you're not thinking straight. The Subaru needed work. You shouldn't be driving anyway. The world is different now. Please just let me manage things for a while." He tapped the folder. "I set up an account. It'll make everything easier." I told him the Subaru was back and that I had reimbursed the buyer. He blinked like someone had turned the lights on in a theater before the credits. "How?" he said. "Why?" "Because it was mine," I said, and kept my voice even. "Easier isn't the same as right." I slid his folder back to him. "There won't be a management account. I appreciate your concern. I don't appreciate unauthorized decisions. Here are the boundaries I need you to respect. My car is mine. My house is not for sale. Your father's tools are not going on Facebook Marketplace. If you believe I need help, you will ask me, and then you will listen to my answer." He started to argue the way a man argues when the river he assumed was shallow turns out to be cold and deeper than his shoes. I held up a hand. "Michael, you're my son. I love you. This is a season where love looks like rules. We will let the rules protect us from hurting each other more." He stared at the cookies as if they'd been put there to trap him. Then he picked up his folder and gathered his breath. "Fine," he said, "if that's how you want it." He paused at the door. "But you can't stop time." After he left, I drove to Asheville to pick up a few things at the hardware store because sometimes you need to buy a box of wood screws to remind yourself you can build a thing if you need to. The Subaru purred like it was happy to be back on the road it knows. When I passed Maple Crest Apartments, I slowed. 3 stories, brick that had seen winters, and learned to be the kind of red that forgives. I wondered which window held my son's life. His coffee mug, his shoes under a chair, his laptop open to a spreadsheet that thinks it understands what people cost. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. The letter folded in my purse reminded me that the world had more rails than the ones I could see. 2 days later, an email arrived from a man named Raj Malhotra, property manager. The subject line was the kind of stern that comes in a polite font: lease renewal notice and compliance items. I knew what it was before I opened it. A list, gentle but not optional. Excessive noise complaint on a Saturday. Bicycle stored in the stairwell against the fire egress policy. Unapproved modification to the thermostat casing. Renewal would proceed at market rate with a date and a number and 3 ways to pay. At the bottom, a sentence I wanted to embroider on a pillow. These rules apply to all residents for the safety and fairness of the community. I wasn't going to call Michael. I wasn't going to warn him or soften it or offer to cover the difference. David's letter had asked me not to. He didn't say it in those words, but the meaning was there, tucked between "I love you" and "you'll do fine." Sometimes kindness is letting a person read the same notice everyone else reads and learn how to say "I'm sorry" and "I'll fix it" to a stranger who doesn't need to love you to be fair. I made a cup of tea. I actually drank this time. I took the USB to the library computer and printed the documents that made Blue Ridge Haven more than a story. Then I came home, put the papers in the blue cabinet in the garage under the tab labeled Seeds, and swept the floor because my husband believed sweeping is a form of prayer. That evening, Michael texted. "Do you know the manager here?" he wrote. I typed and deleted 4 replies. Do I know the manager? Do I know the word boundary? Do I know the difference between mercy and permission? I settled on, I know there are rules. They keep people safe. A long pause, then, they're raising rent. It's happening everywhere, I wrote. I'm sorry, I trust you'll make a good plan. I slept better that night. Not because my son was uncomfortable. Not because I had a secret. I slept because I had a letter in a drawer that sounded like my husband's laugh, and because the house had stopped trying to be clever and gone back to being a house. In the morning, I took the Subaru into town and bought a new lamp for the hallway where the old one had a way of making the wallpaper look tired. On the way home, I turned onto the parkway and let the mountain air come in like a hymn. Halfway up the grade, I pulled over and took the letter out. I read the last paragraph again. If you ever feel pushed out, let the systems do their work. Your job is to be steady. Your job is to be Helen. At the end of that week, Ruth came by with lemon bars and opinions. She asked if I planned to tell Michael about the properties. Eventually, I said, but not as leverage, as context. Ruth nodded. A wise reveal, she said. People respect what arrives at the right time. We sat on the porch and watched a neighbor boy learn to throw a baseball toward the sky. His father stood 3 steps back, hands in his pockets, and said nothing until it was time to say, "Good, now again." It was a good posture. It looked like love that had manners. The next invitation came from me. I texted Michael and asked him to come by Sunday afternoon. I baked cornbread and set out the photo album with the corners repaired with tape. Every family has one. And I placed next to it not the deed papers, not the rent rolls, not the market rate letter. I placed David's shop journal. Sunday came warm and yellow, the kind of afternoon that makes front steps feel like a pew. Michael arrived a few minutes late, carrying a grocery store bouquet with a barcode still on the plastic. I cut the stems and put them in water without commentary. We sat at the kitchen table where the sunlight knows to land. He cleared his throat the way people do when they've brought a prepared speech. I set my palm on the shop journal. Before you say anything, I said, I want you to read some pages. The journal smelled faintly of machine oil and cedar. David had written in a tidy hand, sketched small diagrams for joints and angles, tucked in receipts with dates that told a quiet story of years. Michael flipped through and slowed at a page where David had listed 3 rules for building anything worth keeping. He read them aloud. Measure twice so you don't cut dignity. Sand the edge you'll touch the most. Leave room for wood to breathe. He swallowed. Dad was corny, he said, but there was softness in it. I thought you should see what your father thought counted, I said. He believed in care more than speed. He believed in rules that keep people from splinters. He believed in letting a structure hold itself up. Michael looked at the cookies I'd put out, took one, and actually ate it this time. I don't know why I sold the car, he said, lying to himself first. Then he corrected, I do know. I felt responsible. I didn't want anything to happen to you. I wanted order. He looked up. I went about it like I was the parent and you were a problem. I nodded. Grief makes us reach for handles. Some of them fit our hands. Some of them break. I slid an envelope across the table. This is the bill for the Subaru buyer's inspection. I reimbursed her. It's not about the amount. It's about the straightness of lines between people. He stared at the number like it could rearrange into mercy. Then he took out his wallet and, without negotiating, put cash beside the envelope. "I'm sorry," he said. 2 words with a lot of furniture inside them. We talked about practical things the way you mend a fence, post by post. He asked about transcripts for my medical prescriptions. I told him where the list was, and we agreed he could keep a copy. He asked about emergency contacts. We put his name on one line, Ruth's on another, the way you back up a life with 2 different kinds of strength. Then he asked about money, and I raised a hand. "Pause," I said. "We're going to let systems hold what they're designed to hold. My finances are in order. I don't need a manager. I need a son." He was quiet. "Rent's going up," he said, and there was no complaint in it now, just the fact of weather. There was an email about noise and a bike in the stairwell. I fixed the bike part. The thermostat cover. I'll replace it with the standard. I didn't think it mattered. "Most rules only matter when they're ignored," I said. "You'll be okay. People are allowed to learn at 38. He gave a small laugh. "You make 38 sound like a chair that needs new felt pads." We moved to the porch. He looked at the maple tree David had planted the year Michael learned to ride a bicycle without training wheels. "I miss him," he said, and his face showed the kind of missing that doesn't have a mouth yet. "Me too," I said. We let that sit. The world can handle 2 people telling the truth at the same time. "Mom," he said after a while, "is there something you're not telling me?" He wasn't accusing. He was sensing the way animals sense rain. I looked toward the garage where the blue file cabinet waited. I thought of David's letter. "Reveal at the time that teaches, not the time that wounds." "There is," I said, "and I will. But first I need you to understand something about grown-up help. It keeps the shape of the person it's helping. It doesn't press them into a mold." He nodded. "Okay." On Tuesday, he texted me a photo of a fixed thermostat with the caption, "Standard issue and level." On Thursday, he forwarded me the lease renewal he had signed, market rate, no adjustments, and a note that said, "Budget adjusted. No panic, just math." I didn't reply with a parade. I replied with a thumbs up and a heart and a sentence David used to say when you'd done the decent thing. "Looks right." A week later, I invited him for dinner again. Roast chicken, the way his grandmother used to do it. Salt under the skin, lemon in the cavity, potatoes that remember to hold butter. He carved while I set plates. It felt like a ceremony without being declared one. After we ate, I took out the envelope. "This is for context," I said. Inside were copies, not originals, of the Blue Ridge Haven documents, title pages, management agreements, a summary of monthly income after expenses. At the bottom, a line that said, "Assets titled to Blue Ridge Haven, LLC, owner Helen Carter." He read silently for a long minute. He put the pages down, picked them up again as if a second pass might change their temperature. "Is this you?" he finally asked. "Yes," I said. "Your father set it up years ago. He kept it separate because he wanted it solid before it became anyone else's anxiety. Homestead Property manages it. I have what I need and then some." He stared at the maple crest line item. I waited. He looked up. "So when I got the email from Raj—" "You got the same email everyone gets," I said. "That is, in fact, the point." His mouth worked around a sentence he couldn't decide to say. Then he exhaled and found smaller words. "Thank you for not using it to embarrass me." "I'm not interested in winning at you," I said. "We're family. If one of us wins at the other, we both lose." He nodded. "Some lessons you only absorb when you see the alternative. We talked logistics. I told him I have a will up to date with plain language. I told him there's a binder labeled When in the hall closet with utility accounts, names, numbers, instructions for the tomato plants. I told him Ruth knows where the key is. He didn't ask about the numbers again. Instead, he asked if I'd like help replacing a porch railing that had gone soft where the rain hits it. I would, I said, but you're going to measure twice. He laughed. Dad's rules, he said. Dad's rules, I answered, and we both looked at the journal on the counter like it was a witness who'd been sworn in. 2 Saturdays later, we worked on that railing together. He cut. I held. We learned the choreography again. Who hands which tool when? Who steadies what? How silence can be a kindness. At one point, he set the drill down and said, without looking at me, I told Elaine I was sorry about the Subaru. She said she admired you. I didn't know I needed to hear that until she said it. I pressed a screw into his palm. It helps, I said, and left the rest of the sentence implied. It helps when people see you as you're trying to be. Life didn't turn into a postcard. The washer made a sound like a fork in a garbage disposal, and I wrote down the model number and scheduled service. A neighbor's dog discovered a liking for my flower beds, and I bought a small fence that says, Please, with its shape. Grief remained, but it learned better manners. Some days it shook the pans in the cabinet. Some days it folded quiet laundry. One morning, a letter came from Homestead Property with the quarterly report. I made a pot of coffee and read it at the table with a pen in my hand, not because there were things to correct, but because underlining is a way of acknowledging what supports you. There was a small note attached from Susan. Your late husband always asked about the tenants by name. We hope we're continuing that care. I wrote back, Names matter. Thank you. Please make sure Raj has what he needs. I thought of him then, walking stairwells, checking signs, being the kind of fairness that isn't famous. That afternoon, I drove the Subaru to Maple Crest and left a bag at the office with a note. To the staff, thank you for taking care of a building that takes care of people. There were brownies in the bag and the recipe on an index card, because gratitude should travel in a form that can be replicated. I didn't put my last name. I didn't need to. Work recognizes itself. On a different Sunday, I found myself at church by instinct more than plan. The homily was about the difference between power and authority. Power pushes, authority holds. I thought about how David had built a life where beams knew where to live and doors closed with a kind sound. After the service, a woman I barely knew touched my sleeve and said, You look steady. It might be the best compliment I've ever been given. David would have liked it. He would have said, That's the craft. Michael started coming by on Thursdays to cook dinner, his idea. Some weeks it was omelets and sliced tomatoes, because time had run off with his good intentions. Some weeks it was a recipe he'd looked up and taped to a cabinet door like a talisman. He asked about my day. He offered rides I didn't need. He learned to ask, do you want advice or just company? There isn't a metric for that kind of progress, but if there were, it would look like a measuring tape that remembers to bend around corners. One night, as he was leaving, he paused at the door. I'm applying for a supervisor role, he said. I used to think I should get it because I'm good at telling people what to do. Now I think I might be ready because I'm learning how to let systems and rules do the heavy lifting. I don't have to be special to be decent. He made a face. That sounded better in my head. It sounded just right out loud, I said. We hugged in a way that didn't apologize for anything. I won't pretend the thought of senior living never came up again. It did in a calmer key. We visited a place with a library and a woodworking room. The manager showed me a lathe the way a person introduces you to a dignitary. I told Michael I was not ready, not yet, that my house still had things to teach me, like the patience of a squeaky hinge, like the mercy of a chair that keeps holding you even when you're tired. He accepted that. He took brochures for someday. We put them in the drawer where the instruction manuals live, among the diagrams that prove things can be assembled if you follow the steps and keep the small parts in their little bags. Seasons turned the way honest clocks do. The maple went from green to a kind of brave red that made the neighborhood slow down. I drove the parkway sometimes in the late afternoon, when the light draped itself over the ridges as if to remind the mountains they were always meant to be held. The Subaru kept a hum-like contentment. Sometimes I'd park at an overlook and take out David's letter, not because I needed to check a number or a clause, but because the last paragraph knew how to bless an ordinary day. Let the systems do their work. Your job is to be steady. Your job is to be Helen. If you are listening to this and you're the age where your children clear their throat before they tell you how your life should pivot, I hope you hear the chorus under my words. You're allowed to set rules that keep everyone's dignity intact. You're allowed to say no to the kind of help that forgets your shape. You're allowed to accept real help, too. The kind that brings lemon bars and a tool belt and a willingness to sign the same lease everyone signs. You're allowed to have secrets that are timing, not manipulation. You're allowed to be the person the house recognizes when the lights come on. Sometimes justice is loud. Sometimes it's a notice in a polite font and a railing that doesn't wobble. Sometimes love is a son fixing a thermostat to standard and a mother resisting the urge to turn a lesson into a lecture. Sometimes legacy is a file cabinet labeled seeds and a journal that says leave room for wood to breathe. And sometimes the happiest ending available is not fireworks but furniture. Two people who can sit at the same table and pass the salt without relitigating winter. On the last page of David's journal, there's a drawing of a small stand meant to hold a letter open without creasing it. Below the drawing, he wrote, "Build something that holds the words you'll need later." I think that's what we did. We built a week, then another, then a season, where our words could stand without bending. We measured twice, the past and the present, so we didn't cut dignity. We sanded the edges we touched the most, our habits, our impatience, until they felt like something you could run a hand along without getting hurt. We left room for breath. And in that breathing space, a family became itself again, not because anyone triumphed, but because everybody agreed to be held up by the same good rules. When I drive home now, I still see maple crest on the road. I don't slow down as much as I used to. Somewhere inside, my son is washing a pan or paying a bill or laughing at a joke a television wrote. He lives there as a person who understands rules are not insults. They are invitations to belong. He doesn't know whether the building answers to me, and he doesn't need to. It answers to standards. So do we. And that is enough. I park the Subaru. I walk to the porch where the new railing holds firm, even in rain. I go inside, and the house makes the right sounds. The refrigerator hums. The kettle clicks. The floor remembers where my feet prefer to fall. I open the drawer, take out the letter, and place it on the little stand Michael and I built last weekend. It holds the words without creasing them. I read the lines I already know by heart. Then I turn off the kitchen light and let the evening do what evenings do best. Wrap the day in something soft and honest and leave room for breath.